Hello and welcome to the Strong Suit Podcast, where we focus on the people part of your business. Every Tuesday, every Thursday, I interview a world-class expert on talent and recruiting so that you can build a company filled with rock stars. And I have bagged the elephant today, my friends. When I talk about global, I'm talking about London-based. I'm talking about talent. I'm talking about building a relationship with the talent before you try to call them and hire them, which we're going to talk about for the next 20 minutes. This is probably one of the most crucial parts of recruiting and talent right now. And I'll be candid with you, it's probably one of the biggest mistakes people are making. My guest is Abakar Saidov. Abakar is the CEO of a rocket ship growth company based in London called Beamery. Beamery helps companies that need to hire focus on identifying talent ahead of the curve, getting ahead of it, hiring them and spotting them before the day comes when Sally quits and you're like, oh shit, I got to backfill Sally. You're already too late. You're screwed. So Abakar and his team are trying to solve all this. His background reads like a who's who of anything. I mean, this guy is kind of intimidating. I will tell you, I'm a bit nervous. Goldman Sachs, Francisco Partners, one of the top PE firms in the world. Then he starts Beamery 5 years ago. He's built a team of over 100 people. He's raised over $40 million in capital to build this. This is a real business. And I'm really excited to welcome him because he's going to hopefully set us straight. So Abakar, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Jeff. I appreciate it.
I'm thrilled to speak with you and learn from you. Let's start at the top, which in my mind is just-in-time hiring doesn't work anymore. First question, do you agree or disagree? And maybe just give 60 seconds to the audience on what that even means to you. What is just-in-time hiring and why does it no longer work?
So I totally agree with you. And I think whether it works or doesn't, context is important. So I think in this case, for the last 2 or 3 decades, organizations have hired in the way of, I have a job, here it is, let me go and find some people. And until, when it was an employer's market that worked, and now it's increasingly become competitive in a candidate's market. So for example, if you're hiring high volume where you are the only big dog in the show and everyone wants to work for you, sure, it could work. Whereas if you're hiring for high skill, high demand individuals who have lots of other options, then how are you different to everyone else? That's part one. And part two is your goal is to be able to have some kind of predictability and strategy around how you fill those roles. So what we've been seeing is organizations are starting to move from this reactive model of post jobs and pray people apply to a much more proactive and strategic model of we need to be in control of our own destiny. And
so this is essentially what you're saying, it sounds like, is it's CRM, right? It's just like you have customer relationship management, a funnel, a process to engage with prospects, to turn them into customers, to turn them into loyal customers. You're kind of saying the same thing for candidates, right?
Yes. Well, I mean, the aha moment we had when we started our company was online. You're not a candidate or a customer, you're just someone browsing the web. So surely the same kind of customer lifecycle management. So you have your leads, you have your visitors, you have people that become prospects, and prospects become opportunities, and all of that stuff. Why couldn't that work in recruiting? And the answer is, of course it can. Like a person doesn't care how you think of them as an organization. What they care about is that they're getting value and they're building a relationship and they're engaging with your business. And so the way you build your customer brand can be the same way as you build your employer brand. And so you're right. It is candidate relationship management. It is marketing automation, and it's ultimately treating candidates like consumers.
So if you are Amazon, Goldman, a handful of other companies, Google, where you've got people lined up outside the door, like the best in class lined up outside the door, this probably isn't your biggest priority and your biggest problem, right? Then your issue is, how do you filter through all these people?
Well, I'd actually disagree. So, we're very lucky to call some of those companies that you named, or companies like them, as customers. And the problem isn't just, do I have good people coming to me? The problem then becomes not just filtering them, but how do I make sure that they are actually looking at the right time for the right opportunities. So, for example, if you are one of the biggest recruiters in the world, you might have 3,000, 4,000 talent acquisition professionals. Now, if you think about if we go to kind of 50,000 feet, what are your organizational priorities? So you kind of have four stakeholders. You have your candidates, you have your recruiters, you have your employees, and you have your executives. So if you're trying to say, we're investing in business transformation, you're trying to create a better candidate experience, more efficient and productive recruiters, engaged employees who are part of the cycle, and then the executives want forecasting and planning, right? And so the ability to have something that kind of serves all those purposes. And so as a very large organization, your talent acquisition department becomes quite sophisticated. So for example, you'll have sourcing, which is like sales development. You have employer branding, which is like marketing. You have recruitment operations and executive search and internal mobility and referrals. And all of those things are not resume processing. Those are actually now acquiring talent. And so you need something that is A, unifying the data, B, unifying the experience the candidate is seeing, and being able to then use all of that to drive insights and predictability going forward.
So here's where I'm stuck. Everything you're saying makes sense. My company's 20 people, 50 people, maybe 100 people. We're hiring, some number of people, a dozen. How can I possibly make this a priority, build this infrastructure, hire a team of people to do all these things ahead of the curve? I understand that once I get to scale and I'm hiring hundreds or thousands, it makes sense, right? But in this adolescent phase, other than buying your product, which I'm sure is wonderful, and we'll plug it at the end, I still need to have people operating your software. I still need to have people meeting with candidates ahead of time.
Totally. So actually you hit the nail on the head. Technology comes last. The first thing that happens is the right people and the right processes. And so the biggest thing to move from that reactive to proactive model is to start focusing on the acquisition side rather than the resume processing side. So for example, having someone whose role it is to go out and build relationships with candidates ahead of time. And so you're not, if you liken this to the customer model again, you're not sitting there waiting for people to buy things. Right. You're starting to say, our job is to go out there and build pipeline. And so it's not about just having the products that enables you to build pipeline. Right? So, it's to say, I now have a sourcer, or the job of the recruiter has changed. So if you're a 20-person company, my first recommendation is build a talent acquisition team earlier than you think. Because it's not at 50 or 100 people that you need to do that. It's at 20 people. So
let's talk. So let's get real. Let's get very practical, Abakar. Let's say we have 20 employees. You're saying build a team. What does that team look like? How many people? How much is it going to cost me? And how does that scale when I get to 50 people or 100 people? How many people are we talking about?
Well, it depends really on your growth trajectory. So if you're 20 people and you're growing by 5 people, and you're doing one hire every 3 months, it's less about building a team. It's about probably making it more of a responsibility of every individual. So I spend probably 50% of my time on recruiting, and I think
50%, 50.
Yes.
And you're adding, let's just do the maths. You're at 100. How many people? 125 people or something now?
Yes, that's right. So we're adding about,
how many this year will you hire?
Probably about 100.
So you're going to hire 100 and you spend half your time on it as CEO.
Correct. Yes. And my expectation is that every one of my senior managers spends half their time on it, because it is so important, right? Like, people are everything. And obviously it's kind of a platitude, but if people are everything, then you should be spending an appropriate amount of time on it. So that's the first step. If you're 20 people, then it should be everyone's job to do that. And then you're starting to create that as part of the culture. So I think that's the biggest element, is holding your people accountable to, if we need to grow, it is ultimately the hiring manager's responsibility to ensure that growth happens.
So even more important than this CRM strategy and engaging with candidates ahead of time is just the commitment to spend the time on this, right?
Correct. And the commitment to make this something that you discuss in your staff meetings. So recruiting performance metrics need to become something that is as important as your financial metrics, because if you're planning to grow, then it needs to be front and center.
And as opposed to what I think I heard you say in there is, as opposed to doing what most companies do, which is having people spending time on inbound crap, job postings, over the transom people, sorting and filtering through things. Just redeploy that time, right? Switch it, reinvest that time. So basically stop doing that and invest that time going outbound.
Well, it depends on the stage. So typically, if you're a 20-person company, you do not have the employer brand to generate typically the type of quality of talents that you would want to hire at that point. And there are exceptions, obviously, but it's similar with sales. Like if you're a tiny brand, people aren't coming to you asking for your product. You're going to have to go out there and sell it.
Yeah.
So in this case, it's the same. Is until you become this amazing brand that has got a lot of publicity that everyone wants to work for, you have to go out there and get those people.
Got it. So let's talk about what that actually looks like. What are the few things that we need to do? I'm sure your software helps with it, but just conceptually, when am I going out? To whom am I going out? What does even going out look like? Does that mean I'm going to networking events on Thursday nights at bars to meet candidates? Or where is the 80-20 that you've learned over the 5 years of doing this? That if I can nail this activity or a few things, it helps to reverse the funnel.
Sure. So I'll give you some examples of what me and my co-founders used to do in our early days. The first part is obviously running a company, especially if you're a first-time founder or CEO, it's you have a lot of things on your mind, and so saying, "Oh my God, I have to spend 50% of my time on recruiting." What does it even mean? A lot of that time is eaten up by interviewing and all those things. So what we found really helps is time boxing things around sourcing. So my co-founders and I would say we'd spend a couple of hours, beginning of week, end of week, on looking at Angel List, LinkedIn, GitHub, etc., and finding profiles of people that we found were relevant and actually messaging them ourselves, because it is a lot more powerful to receive a message from the CEO of a company than it is, or a VP engineering or something else, than it is from a recruiter, because people think that you care and the company cares.
And these are one-on-one outreaches. Correct,
one-on-one outreaches, because the worst thing you can do to your brand is to scattershot. I found is that sending 1,000 outreaches that are impersonalized.
What does that outreach sound like? I'm proactively reaching out to someone. I have no idea if they're looking for a job. I have no idea if they're happy in their job. They don't know who I am. They don't know who my company is. What is the gist of that outreach that you found will get them to say, yeah, I'll have a conversation?
So it has to, the ingredients are actually quite simple. The ingredients are that you have spent literally a modicum of time understanding who this person is and what they care about. So being able to not just have a generic, hey, engineer X or salesperson X, please, are you interested in this job? It's being able to have a single sentence that says, hey, I noticed you do this, or I noticed you're interested in this. So for example, in our early days hiring software engineers, we would say, hey, I saw you contributed to this GitHub repository. That's really interesting. And linking that to what you're doing and saying, I think you'll find what we're doing interesting for the following reasons. Would love to have a chat. Literally, that 2-line message has had the best conversion of anything we've ever done.
Got it. But this is, now I see why you're spending half your time on this. You're customizing messages based on individual profiles to a shitload of people.
Well, the thing is, you don't need that much volume if you do it this way. So would you rather spend non-custom messages to 100 or custom messages to 20? And so the question becomes, do you want to be the airstrike or the sniper model? Right. And what we found is that it's kind of the kind of company you want to be. And for us, we wanted to be known for being personalized, being targeted, going after very specific people that we thought would be great. And I think, especially if you're hiring for high skill, people want to see that you care. So we talked about earlier that candidates want to see value before being asked for something. It's that principle.
And give us an example when you say value. They want to see value. Please tell me you're not talking about content with a free PDF or something.
No, I'm talking about the fact that you are showing them that you understand them, and the fact that you're not reaching out to them as a transaction. That you are actually someone that is interested in what they're interested in. And I think the other thing is having just a small amount of sophistication around what for different roles, what people care about. So for example, with the technical side of the business, with software engineers, they really they like learning. And so what the reach out should contain is this is why what we're working on is interesting and what you could learn. In the commercial side of the organization, it's often it's learning, but in a different way. It's the kind of customers you get to work with. It's the kind of things that you get to do that you didn't get to do before. And so
income potential. You're going to make a shitload of money.
Correct, as well. But they want some validation in that, because you have to remember that the really, really in-demand people obviously have a lot of this happening. And so what's really satisfying is being able to have someone say, I get 100 of these messages a day, you're the only one I respond to.
Yeah. So this is fascinating. What have you learned about the cycle time? So when you talk about CRM, you have a sales cycle, right? From the time of that first outreach to the time you sign the $500,000 contract with that customer. What have you learned about statistically, which I'm sure you track because you sound pretty metrics obsessed, kind of that first outreach from you at home on your couch, looking at GitHub profiles and sending messages, to the time that person joins the company? I know it's a large distribution. I know it's a bell curve, but how early do I need to dig my well before I'm thirsty?
So let me answer slightly from reverse. If you think about the candidate lifecycle, and you talk to most companies and most jobs, the proverbial time to hire from the moment a job opens up to the moment that you fill it is usually around 60 to 90 days, depending on the complexity. And so if you think about how much of that is the interview process, it's about 2 weeks. And so you're saying, out of a 90-day time to hire, what are the other 76 days? And the other 76 days are the time to find and time to engage.
Right.
And so the point is, if you were able to turn that 76 days into 20, 15, because you've already engaged that person, because you've already interacted with them and they're already interested, and then it becomes, sure, I'll come interview with you. The productivity gain and the value of that is huge. As an example, I think there's a general industry principle that someone's value to the business is about 3 to 4x their annual salary, and so shaving that off can be tens of thousands of dollars per person per role that you fill. As to come back to the original question, how much time in advance? It depends on the amount of and volume of roles that you have. So the lead cycle can be typically from a couple of months to 6 months. What we found is, let's say you're doing some campus recruiting. You should be building relationships with people a year or two before they graduate, because by the time that they're graduating, they already have been bombarded with a whole bunch of.
You need to think about how far do I need to go upstream relative to how far upstream other companies are going and my competitors. Exactly. And also based on how scarce that role is, and to your point, how many I hire, right? So if most of my hiring is software developers, or most of my hiring is sales reps, that's where I should focus my time, right?
Exactly, and there's a cyclicality to it. So, for example, sales reps is a really good example. Typically, sales reps wait till the end of quarter, till they get paid their commission, till they leave. And so you want to be starting 1 or 2 quarters in advance to try and understand, are they going to have a good year? Are they happy where they're at? And being able to anticipate that if the quarter end is in March, you're not going to hire them in March. They're going to wait till April to see what happens. And
there is a natural cycle time to it.
Exactly.
I have to imagine our listeners are still a little skeptical about their ability to invest this kind of time. It's kind of hard to argue with the logic of it, right? And I totally get it. But these people are running companies, they're running businesses, they're running departments. And you're saying spend half your time on this, spend your weekends and evenings emailing strangers from LinkedIn and GitHub, and take a shitload of, I'm sure, informational interviews or very low probability kind of meetings. How do you convince someone that's skeptical that they got to take a leap of faith, right? That this is going to pay off? What data can you point to? What examples do you have? Anything that can make someone say, well, it worked for them, it should work for me?
Well, I think I actually don't think people would be as skeptical. It's one of those things, every CEO of a Fortune 100 says, people are my biggest priority. And so I think it's one of those cognitive dissonance points. If you realize that to your business, people are important and they are really important, surely investing a proportional amount of time in your people is the right thing to do. And I think the other piece, obviously, is there's plenty of data on what the right hire is and the value they produce. Bad hires losing kind of months or even years of productivity. And so I think you've got to ask yourself, what kind of business you are and what kind of business you want to be. And, sometimes if you're very capital intensive, if you're maybe people are not as much of an asset to you as another organizations, but I think it should be kind of fairly self-explanatory there. And obviously, as a shameless plug, there is software out there that makes these things a little bit easier and a little bit more automated.
So let's do that now. So give us an overview of Beamery and what pieces of the process it handles versus what you really need a human to do.
Sure, that's a great question. So fundamentally, the people and the processes that we talked about for the last kind of 10, 15 minutes is what you need to do first. And so the last part is to be able to say, well, where do we store all that data? How do we actually build those pipelines? And it's a very similar analogy to something like Salesforce.com. You don't need the product until you have a sales team, until you know who you're selling to, and until you do all these things. But it enables you to then have organize your data and data governance, organize your processes to be unified and one-directional, and then be able to use all of that to make everyone do the same thing to the same level of quality, speed, and being able to then forecast and report on it. So our product has a few key components. We have a core CRM product that allows you to do that. We have a core marketing product that is essentially all of the employer brand management, communication and messaging, and CMS pieces. We actually have a compliance tool for things like GDPR compliance to be able to enable you to own that, and a connectivity layer that integrates with pretty much every other HR and recruiting system that you use to be able to create that unified data set.
And does this make sense once I reach a certain size or stage in my company, whether it's revenue, people, whatever?
It starts to make sense once you start actually building a formal talent acquisition team, because it's, as you say, it's really difficult to get executives or business leaders to go and learn another tool and live somewhere else. So that's not part of their day job. I think once you start saying, okay, recruitment is actually a strategic asset, and you're probably hiring maybe close to 100 people a year at that point, that's when it becomes relevant.
Got it. I understand. So you've hit that inflection point. You're on a growth trajectory where hiring is a crucial thing. That's when it makes sense to get a product like this.
Yes, and when it becomes a bit more, how how many people you're going to hire, and you have very specific targets around it.
Abakar, this is fantastic. How can people learn more about Beamery or get in touch with you?
Absolutely. So Beamery.com, Beamery is our website. There's a lot of information, obviously, about our product. You can request a demo, get in touch with our commercial team there. So we'd love for you to get in touch.
I give you so much credit because this is really, you're really trying to evangelize and change the way that people hire, right? And as you know, when you try to create a movement, it's really friggin' hard. I implore our listener to take this seriously, whether you use Beamery or not, which I think is as good as it gets. You have to dig your well before you're thirsty, or you are hosed. Abakar, thank you so much for making the time today. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeff, for having me.